In simplest terms, inmate James W. is the most valuable and dangerous asset in the history of the Agency of Helping Hands. Without him, the agency's ability to achieve its shadowy objectives would be crippled beyond repair. James frequently sneers, "I'm the only one who gets anything real done around here." While technically untrue, the statement has just enough venomous edge to sow doubt among his peers and supervisors alike. He revels in his indispensability, wielding it as a weapon to demand perks unheard of in an institution like this. James's background is a tightly knotted enigma, shrouded in the lies he spins with calculated malice. Any attempts to extract truth from him are met with a smirk and another twisted narrative designed to send the agency's analysts into yet another tailspin. His pre-agency life remains a black hole, his psychological profile a labyrinth of contradictions and dead ends. This ambiguity is a significant barrier to understanding James, a man whose complexities border on grotesque. Initially, James was diagnosed as a textbook sadistic psychopath. Over time, a more intricate and troubling picture emerged. His mental health evaluations now list a litany of diagnoses: behavior addiction disorder, severe substance abuse disorder, complex PTSD, histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, and schizotypal personality disorder. Each layer adds to the rich tapestry of his volatile mind. While his sadistic tendencies remain a core part of his personality, James has honed them into a dark art, releasing them only under tightly regulated conditions. This control, however, is no act of altruism. It's a sinister game he plays, twisting agency policies to his advantage. The agency, desperate to retain his cooperation, has facilitated these expressions of cruelty as a grim incentive to keep him focused on his work. Here lies the paradox. James himself has repeatedly demanded these privileges be revoked. It would be easy to mistake this for remorse, but history has shown otherwise. Suppression of his sadistic urges leads not to penitence, but to an escalation of violence, manifesting in ways the agency can no longer ignore. For the sake of operational stability, his requests are routinely denied, reinforcing the cycle of sanctioned brutality that James manipulates so expertly. The exact nature of James's rewards and their implications remain classified, locked behind layers of need-to-know clearance. Few within the agency are privy to the details, but whispers of their existence circulate, feeding his near-mythic status among staff and inmates. James exhibits moments of apparent self-reflection, but they are hollow performances. He dances around accountability, casting blame in every direction but his own. His words are masterfully chosen, designed to deflect and obfuscate. This deliberate distancing from his actions is one of the largest barriers to any meaningful rehabilitation. There's another side to James that even the agency struggles to manage: his proclivity for intimidation. When he feels threatened, or worse, overshadowed, his reaction is swift and unrelenting. Female staff, in particular, have borne the brunt of his sexualized aggression, enduring encounters that are as chilling as they are disruptive. Measures have been taken to mitigate these incidents, but his behavior continues to ripple through the organization like a toxic tide. Perhaps more alarming is James's penchant for self-harm. Unlike his outward violence, this behavior seems to stem from a deeper, more sinister source. He's been caught mutilating himself with a cold detachment that unnerves even the most seasoned observers. Stabbing, starving, cutting, his methods are as varied as they are disturbing. The most grotesque manifestation of this self-destructive streak is his obsession with pulling out his own teeth. Every sanctioned act of sadism is followed by this ritualistic act, as though he's offering up pieces of himself to atone, or perhaps to revel further in his own twisted sense of power. And yet, the macabre reality is that his teeth always grow back. This bizarre regeneration process is tied to his apparent immortality. James ages only when his mouth is devoid of teeth, a phenomenon the agency has studied extensively. Over decades, he has aged less than 4 years, defying natural law and fueling suspicions about the origin of his condition. Each time he extracts his teeth, James suffers bouts of temporal lobe dementia, a temporary madness that leaves him disoriented and volatile. These episodes subside once his teeth begin to regenerate, but the period of lucidity that follows is no less disturbing. It's as though he emerges sharper, darker, and even more cunning after each cycle. Religion is another area where James's pathology becomes especially opaque. There are hints, fragments of stories he lets slip, always laced with mockery, that suggest he has endured profound religious trauma. The agency has tried to dig deeper, hoping to use this information to better control and treat him, but James guards these secrets with a ferocity unmatched by his other deceptions. Inmate Logan W. is uniquely cooperative, to a degree that far exceeds the expectations for someone with his proclivities. Not only does he comply with directives, but he also mentors and trains new personnel, often with a calculated charm that makes him seem invaluable. The root of this willingness is his unrelenting hunger for approval and admiration, so consuming it borders on pathological. This weakness, though dangerous in other contexts, has been a cornerstone of the agency of Helping Hand's exploitation of him, ensuring his continued compliance. Logan thrives on verbal praise, to an almost grotesque degree. When given, he displays behaviors that seem out of place for someone with his darker inclinations, acts of camaraderie, protectiveness, even unsettling moments of tenderness. These behaviors surface most frequently around individuals he deems strong in character, a perception that gives the agency another way to control him. As part of its strategy, the agency has paired Logan as a T-class operative with Commander Nathaniel Reeves, their most formidable and decorated field agent. This pairing ensures both Logan's utility and containment. It must be emphasized, Logan is strictly prohibited from partnering with any female agent under any circumstance. This directive is not to be questioned. Logan, a Caucasian male who appears to be in his early 40s, is physically imposing. Standing at 6 feet 6 inches with a muscular build, he towers over most of his peers. His brown hair and hazel eyes are unremarkable compared to his sheer presence, which exudes both menace and control. Despite the severity of his nature, Logan takes an obsessive pride in his grooming, always immaculately dressed and styled, a trait some speculate stems from an underlying need to mask his inner chaos. Logan despises the standard T-class field uniform, petitioning repeatedly to wear attire of his choosing when operating outside agency facilities. In a rare move that seems deliberately intended to frustrate him, administration has consistently denied this request. Due to his unparalleled value, Logan is exempt from standard disciplinary measures. Any grievances, complaints, or concerns about his conduct bypass the chain of command entirely, landing directly in the hands of agency leadership. This privileged status has done little to temper his more egregious behaviors, but the agency tolerates them because, without him, its operations would unravel. Despite the dark cloud of his existence, Logan shows signs of emotional growth, if growth can be measured in sharpened manipulation and perfected lies. His success in fulfilling directives remains a beacon of his usefulness. The agency recognizes this, and it bends over backward to maintain his cooperation, no matter the cost. Logan W. is, without question, the agency's most indispensable and dangerous asset. Ensuring his continued usefulness, through careful manipulation of his mental and physical health, remains a top priority. Interview transcript. Subject: the apex predator. Classification: cooperative/volatile/chimeric titan/deceiver/critical/apex. Classification pending final revision. Interviewer: Natalie B. Date: November 26, 2024. I've forgotten more than you could ever comprehend. I'm glad for it. But you're not interested in what I've lost, are you? No, you're here for what lingers. The scraps. The memories that refuse to die. Fine. Let me give you what you want. I remember famine. When I was young, hunger clung to us like a curse. My mother, swollen with another man's child, abandoned me to chase salvation elsewhere. She needed food, work, and a future for her new family. Her husband decided I wasn't part of it. He told me it was time to be a man, that a true man doesn't steal food from the mouths of women and children. He said it like it was a lesson, but it felt like a sentence. I didn't want to steal food from them. But wanting didn't make me a man. People love to romanticize hardship, don't they? Say things like, oh, back then kids grew up fast. At 13, they were practically adults. Liars, every last one. I was 13 when my mother left me behind, and I was just a starving, broken child. I remember digging in frozen earth for roots, my fingers raw and useless. I remember killing a crippled rabbit and sobbing over its mangled body, unable to eat it. I buried it instead, because even in my desperation, I couldn't stomach what I'd done. I remember the abbey. And the priest. The abbey wasn't a place of salvation. It was survival in a different kind of hell. I prayed for my mother to return, even though I knew she never would. She was devout, obedient to her husband's commands. A man must fend for himself, he said. And so, I was left to do just that. But I grew. Slowly, painfully, I grew. And I learned something about myself. I like to use my teeth. I don't know when it began, and I don't want to remember. But I do remember the women, the forgotten, the unseen, the ones no one missed. I was small for my age, but pretty. My mother gave me that. My strength, though, came from somewhere else. Pretty people get used. Pretty and strong people learn to use others. I became good at that. Too good. I wish I hadn't been pretty. I remember using my teeth. A lot. The stories began soon after. A monster, a wolf that preyed on virgins. It made me laugh, the virgin part. None of them were. But people love their horror stories, and they need their villains to be larger than life. The nuns knew what I was. They hated me for it. I wasn't worth their pity, only their beatings. And yet they still left me with the priest. He protected me, not out of kindness, but guilt. He liked that I was pretty too. He thought I became a monster because of him. I let him think that. Priests in those days wielded a power unmatched by the clergy of today. They used it not just to lead but to control, to shelter, to destroy. My priest used his power to shield me, forcing the nuns and brothers to lie, to overlook my comings and goings, to cover the dark paths I carved. It was easier than it should have been. I was clever in my choices. The women I sought were the world's discards, those deemed less. Whores, servants, madwomen, orphans, witches. The priest especially appreciated my attention to witches. In those days, witches were a very grave matter. Suffer not a witch to live, after all. He didn't care for my methods, but he was a man of God, and methods didn't matter as long as the results were sanctified. I was good at finding women no one would miss. My mistake was choosing one that someone did. She told me she was a servant, visiting the city in her mistress's entourage. Her mistress, she said, was kind, generous enough to grant her ladies an evening of freedom. She told me we had all night. She told me I was far too handsome for a boy. And far too strong. She told me I was hurting her. Then, when there was no breath left to shape words, she screamed. Much too late, long after my teeth had torn through her delicate flesh, I learned the truth. She wasn't a servant. She was the treasured daughter of a wealthy man, and the wife of an even wealthier one. A costly thing, like a jewel or a prize stallion. Men do not like when you ruin their costly things. They care little for the ruined object, but their rage at the ruiner consumes them utterly. It was only a matter of time before they found me. I remember the day my priest's power crumbled, the moment he could no longer shield me. The Lord's men came over the hills, their armor shining like fire in the sun. "Run, boy! Run!" the priest shouted, shoving me out the door. So I ran. I ran for days. Through fields, villages, across streams. It didn't matter. They followed. Always behind me, their fury driving them like hounds. On the fourth day, they nearly caught me. I killed one of them, a man who was small and soft. But not before he screamed, his shrill cry cutting through the trees, drawing the rest to me like wolves to blood. By then, I was no better than an animal, starved, filthy, desperate. And like an animal, I bolted into the forest. The forest was no sanctuary. I couldn't feed myself. Roots eluded me, rabbits darted away before I could strike. Water was all I found, but it poisoned me. My fever raged, turning the world into a fever dream of molten rocks, shifting trees, and voices that mocked me from the shadows. A deer spoke with my stepfather's voice, urging me to hang myself. I believed the Lord's men were everywhere. I thought I saw the priest in the trees, the nuns in the underbrush. They whispered of punishment. Then I saw the house. At first, I thought it was another fevered vision. Among all the distortions of my mind, it seemed the least real. But it was real. Smoke curled from the chimney. Stars shone faintly in the twilight. Chickens pecked lazily at the ground, clucking softly. One chicken approached me and, mistaking my filthy toenail for a bug, gave it a sharp peck. I laughed, delirious and broken. That was the last thing I remembered before darkness took me. "There you are," a voice said, pulling me back from the void. A low, guttural moan followed, inhuman and terrible. My eyes flew open, and I screamed. "You're safe," the voice said firmly. I thrashed, terrified, but hands held me down, small but impossibly strong. I fought, but I was nothing. Weak. Helpless. "Calm yourself, boy," the voice commanded. "I will feed you." The words cut through my panic like a blade. She was small, this woman. Dark hair, sharp features, bright eyes that burned with confidence. "Are you calm?" Before I could answer, that awful moan came again. I turned toward the sound, and recoiled. A figure sat in the corner, rocking back and forth. Her limbs were gaunt, her face skeletal, her eyes empty and glassy. Her presence filled me with revulsion. "That is Anna, my daughter," the woman said. "Don't be afraid. She is good and gentle." Gentle? She was monstrous, an abomination. I'd seen her kind before, in the church. The priest called them God's punishments, cursed and damned. "What's wrong with her?" I demanded. "Nothing," the woman said evenly. Fear and anger twisted inside me. "She's cursed. Punishment for sin, hers or yours." The words were the priest's, but hearing them from my mouth filled me with fury. "She is no such thing." Her voice was calm but steel-hard. "She is innocent. And more beautiful than you or I will ever be." Beautiful? I had never seen anything so hideous. "I'd rather die than live like her." "Then you are weak." Her voice sharpened. She crouched, bringing her eyes level with mine. "You are a child, and I don't want to turn a child out of my home. But if you stay, you will treat my daughter with kindness and respect. I will teach you those things. And Anna will teach you about a different kind of strength." Her words stung. I wanted to argue. But the warm house, the food, the safety, it was all too tempting. Even if it meant learning to be kind to a cursed girl, it was better than the abbey. So I stayed. Over the days that followed, I learned much about Maggie. I discovered she couldn't speak, though her ears caught every sound. Lillian suspected she might be blind, though there was no certainty. Maggie loved the feel of the cat's soft fur and the smooth surface of eggs, cradling them with a care that seemed almost unnatural. She never cracked a single shell. Yet, for some reason, she couldn't stand the squirming, fragile bodies of baby chicks. She flinched if one came near her. She had other peculiarities as well. Fever seized her often, leaving her trembling violently on the floor, her eyes rolling back until only the whites were visible. It was as if she were claimed by something unholy. Watching her like that only deepened my belief. Maggie was a punishment, a mark of divine wrath. Lillian, however, didn't seem to share my view. Every day, she led Maggie into the sunlight, placing her hands on flowers, leaves, stones, and the rough boards of the garden fence. As she did, she whispered each name softly into Maggie's ear until the girl responded with her strange, guttural moan. "Why waste your time?" I asked Lillian one afternoon. She looked up from where she crouched beside Maggie and said, "Because she deserves someone to teach her. Everyone deserves that." I didn't say it out loud, but I envied Maggie. I wanted someone to guide my hands to the names of the world, someone who cared enough to try. Of course, I already knew those names, but that wasn't the point. The point was being wanted. My time in the garden wasn't entirely wasted, though. I discovered I had a particular gift. I could smell rot and disease in the plants long before it became visible. It wasn't a skill I had sought, but Lillian was quick to exploit it. My nose saved crops that might have been lost otherwise, and soon, the garden yielded more than ever before. I knew she appreciated this about me, even if she never said so. But Maggie wouldn't eat. It didn't matter how much we harvested or how carefully Lillian prepared the food. Maggie's skeletal frame betrayed her defiance. She moaned, spat out bites, and swung her hands wildly, sometimes sending plates crashing to the floor. One night she struck Lillian hard enough to send her sprawling, food scattering across the room. That was the first time I saw Lillian cry. I don't like crying. It disgusts me. But strangely, I didn't hate her for it. I think it reminded me of my mother, of the days before her illness hollowed her out. When Maggie turned away from yet another meal, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I brought my plate to her and said, "You're going to eat this." Maggie responded with her usual moan. I ignored it, pressing a softened carrot to her lips. To my surprise, she took it. Then another. And another. She ate until the plate was empty, leaving me both surprised and satisfied. Lillian wept again, though this time her tears were different. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. "I'm glad Maggie has a brother like you." From that night on, feeding Maggie became my responsibility, just one more chore added to my growing list. I took over carrying her to the little room beneath the floorboards, her nest, as Lillian called it, whenever patients arrived. Lillian insisted it was to protect Maggie from the stress of strangers, though I suspected the real reason. Patients already whispered about the strange girl and her fits. Lillian wanted to avoid giving them more fuel for their suspicions. I didn't mind sitting with Maggie during those times. Sometimes I fed her. Other times, I carved small toys from scraps of wood, placing them in her hands and naming them while muffled cries of labor echoed above us. One night, as we sat in the flickering light of the nest, Lillian turned to me. "Why did you come to the woods, Ethan? A boy with hands like yours, with a nose like that, you could have been anything." I froze. I couldn't tell her the truth. "I'm not a boy," I said instead. "I'm a wolf." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then it's good you found your way to the forest. Wolves belong here." That was the end of it. She didn't press further, and I was grateful. Life settled into a rhythm. I hunted plants in the woods by scent, brought them to her table, and helped with patients when she needed an extra set of hands. Lillian even taught me to mix herbs, though her trust didn't extend to everything. "You've got sharp teeth," she told me once. "I'm not sure you'd use them wisely." I grinned at her. No, I bared my teeth, and let the subject drop. But there were moments when my control slipped. Moments when I felt the old hunger rise, sharp and insistent. A whisper at first, then a roar. It happened around certain patients, the weak ones, the helpless ones. I told myself I would never act on those thoughts again. And for the most part, I didn't. For the most part. I held her, sobbing and screaming, realizing with soul-crushing clarity that every time I had sunk my teeth into someone, it had been someone like her. Someone forgotten, unseen, and unprotected. As her lifeblood seeped between my fingers, I unraveled. My thoughts, my very being fractured as I clung to her broken body. A hunter charged me, his blade flashing. The knife plunged into my chest, cold steel slicing through flesh. My vision blurred, but I refused to let go of Lillian's blood-slick hand. The world dimmed, then burst into a light so pure it overwhelmed me. I found myself standing beneath a soft, golden sun. A gate of stars loomed above, opening to a place so impossibly beautiful it could only be heaven. Beside me stood Lillian, whole and radiant, her hands still clasped in mine. Tears of joy poured down my face, for I believed, just for a moment, that we would ascend together. But her hand slipped away. I screamed, reaching for her, my fingers tangling in her shimmering dress. The fabric tore, a fragment sparkling like the night sky drifting down to me. It fell across my open mouth, and her voice echoed softly, a bittersweet lullaby of regret. Wolves with teeth can't go to heaven. The light vanished. I was back in the filthy, blood-soaked cottage, my lungs collapsing under the weight of repeated stabs. Another knife. And another. Hands dragged me away as darkness claimed me. When I awoke, rot and blood tainted the air. I crawled through the gloom, seeking Lillian. I found her broken body in the corner, unrecognizable. I curled beside her, trembling, and fell into an empty sleep. Morning brought no miracles. Her body remained cold and lifeless, a grim reflection of my failure. I stepped into the sunlight, raising my hands, and froze. They were not the hands I remembered. Bony, clawed, wolfish. My outside finally reflected what I had always been inside, a monster. All except for my teeth. My mouth was empty. The big, bad wolf had no fangs. I laughed until my voice cracked. Then I screamed, grief surging as I realized, for the second time, she had left me behind. Yet when I heard Maggie's moan from her hidden nest, a flicker of purpose broke through my despair. She still needed me. I fed her, buried our mother, and began piecing together the shattered remnants of our lives. I cleaned the cottage, checked on the chickens, and tended the garden. Each day, I felt myself change. My wolfish form receded, slowly, reluctantly, but my teeth never returned. I didn't know if that made me relieved or furious. I didn't have time to wonder. Maggie depended on me. I cared for her with all the love and determination I could muster. I sang to her, held her through her fevers, taught her the names of the world by guiding her hands across its textures. I promised her that I would never leave. But the fever returned, fiercer than before. This time, no herbal remedy, no whispered prayer, could keep her alive. She died in my arms, her tiny body still as stone. My screams filled the forest, unanswered. And when she was gone, I felt it. My teeth grew back. So did the hunger. I fought it, tried to be strong. But strength had never been my virtue. My teeth brought power and savagery, and I leaned into them. I grew tall, my body hardening with unnatural strength. The beauty I once cursed fell away, leaving behind something sharp and monstrous. The monster I had always been. Don't look at me like that. Not like that. Not you. Christophe lunged across the table. I threw myself sideways, falling out of my chair as he tore through it with a feral swipe. His face, contorted with rage, was unrecognizable. Fear locked me in place for one terrible second before survival instincts kicked in. I didn't run. Instinct told me never to run from something like him. I tried to restrain him, a desperate throwback to old training that was useless now. He tossed me aside as if I weighed nothing. Before he could lunge again, the door burst open. Dr. Wingeride stood framed in the doorway. Without thinking, I placed myself between him and Christophe. My body screamed to run, to collapse, to give up, but I didn't dare. "Leave him alone, Charlie," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "He did what he was supposed to. He's done." Dr. Wingeride yanked me out, slamming the door. Christophe crashed against it, screaming obscenities. The reinforced autolock held, but the sound of his fury echoed long after. "You did well," Dr. Wingeride said, grinning like a predator. "Exactly what we needed." The question burst out of me before I could stop it. "How many women has he killed?" "That's a conversation for—" "How many?" Wingeride's expression faltered. I pushed harder, my anger surging in waves until even he couldn't contain me. Finally, he muttered something about how he'd rather face Christophe again than me. A compliment? Maybe. I didn't care. In a few hours, I'll meet Commander Raphael Wingeride. He's Christophe's field supervisor and the only one who might control him. What will he say? What will happen next? I don't know. For the first time since I arrived, all I want is to leave.